"Step out of the vehicle, now." The words snapped through the quiet street like a whip. The elderly man's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale, veins raised like cords beneath thinning skin. He blinked once, slowly, as if his ears hadn't quite caught up with what was being demanded of him. I'm sorry, officer," he said. His voice was soft, worn thin by age. "Did I do something wrong?" Officer Tyler Reeves didn't answer right away. He stood beside the driver's door, one hand resting casually on his belt, the other tapping impatiently against the window frame. His patrol car lights flashed red and blue against the quiet suburban homes, painting the scene in harsh, accusing colors. "You rolled through that stop sign," Reeves said finally, his tone clipped and sharp. "And you were driving 10 under the limit. You trying to cause an accident?" The old man swallowed. "No, sir. This street, it's new to me. I don't drive much anymore." Reeves snorted. "That's obvious." The insult hung in the air longer than the sirens. Slowly, carefully, the elderly man shifted his stiff body and reached for the door handle. It creaked as he opened it, his movements deliberate, cautious, the movements of someone who knew his body no longer obeyed him the way it once had. He stepped out, leaning heavily on the door for balance. Reeves' eyes flicked down, then back up, irritation sharpening his expression. "Hands where I can see them," he barked. The man startled, lifting both hands immediately, palms open. Yes, of course." Cars passed by slowly now, curious, watching. A woman walking her dog paused on the sidewalk across the street. A teenage boy stopped on his bike. Phones subtly lifted. Reeves didn't seem to care. "You know why people your age shouldn't be behind the wheel?" the officer said, voice loud enough for others to hear. The old man looked confused. I passed my renewal test last year." "That's not what I asked," Reeves snapped. "You're slow, you hesitate, you make bad decisions. That puts everyone else at risk." The man's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. Reeves stepped closer. "License and registration." "Yes, sir." The elderly man turned back toward the car, moving stiffly, reaching into the glove box. His fingers fumbled for a moment, arthritis making fine movements difficult. Reeves exhaled loudly. "Come on, it's not complicated." "I apologize," the man murmured. "My hands aren't what they used to be." "No kidding." The glove box finally opened. Inside were neatly stacked papers, folded maps, an old pair of driving gloves, and a worn leather wallet. The man pulled out his license with shaking fingers and handed it over. Officer Reeves glanced at it. "Harold Whitman," he read aloud. 82. He looked up sharply. 82 years old, and you still think it's a good idea to be driving? Harold Whitman met his gaze. "I only drive to the pharmacy and the grocery store. My wife can't get around anymore." Reeves scoffed. "That's not my problem." He turned, walked back to his patrol car, and began typing aggressively on the computer. Harold stood there in the cold, hands still raised slightly, unsure whether he was allowed to lower them. Minutes passed. The red and blue lights continued to flash. People continued to stare. When Reeves returned, ticket book in hand, his expression carried the unmistakable satisfaction of someone about to exercise power. "All right, Mr. Whitman, I'm citing you for failure to stop completely and impeding traffic." Harold's shoulders sagged. "How much will that be?" $480. The number hit like a punch. Harold inhaled sharply. "Officer, I'm on a fixed income. I didn't mean—" Reeves cut him off. "Intent doesn't matter. Law's the law." He scribbled on the pad, tearing off the ticket with a sharp flick. "Sign here." Harold stared at the paper, his eyes struggling to focus. May I ask something?" he said gently. Reeves sighed exaggeratedly. "What? Could you please explain what I did wrong so I don't repeat it?" Reeves laughed. Actually laughed. "You ran a stop sign and drove like a snail. That explanation enough for you?" Harold nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." He reached for the pen Reeves shoved toward him, his hand shaking harder now, not just from age, but from something deeper. Humiliation. As Harold signed the ticket, the glove box remained open, and inside it, barely visible beneath the paperwork, sat something Reeves hadn't noticed yet. A dark green folder, old, faded, with gold lettering barely clinging to the surface. Reeves tore the ticket from the pad and held it out. "There, you're free to go. And honestly," he leaned in closer, voice low but cutting, "maybe it's time you stop driving before you hurt someone." Harold accepted the ticket with both hands. "I understand," he said softly. As he turned back toward his car, his knee buckled slightly. He caught himself on the door. Reeves rolled his eyes. "Jesus, you okay?" "Yes, just old bones." Harold reached into the glove box again, this time for his registration, and the green folder slipped out, landing on the pavement with a dull slap. Reeves glanced down instinctively. The gold letters caught the flashing lights. United States Armed Forces Service Record. Reeves froze. Harold bent slowly, painfully to retrieve it. "I'm sorry," he said, embarrassed. "That shouldn't have fallen out." Reeves stared at the folder, then at Harold, then back at the folder again. The world seemed to slow. "Service record?" Reeves said slowly, his voice noticeably different now. Harold paused. "Yes, sir." "What branch?" Harold straightened as much as his body allowed. "Army." Reeves swallowed. "And when did you serve?" Harold hesitated, not out of pride, but habit. 1959 to 1971. The silence that followed was heavy. Vietnam. Reeves felt something tighten in his chest. He looked at the ticket still clutched in his hand, then back at the man standing in front of him, shaking, humiliated, polite despite everything. "Sir," said Reeves slowly, "may I see that folder?" Harold studied him for a moment. Then, without a word, he handed it over. Reeves opened it, and everything he thought he knew about the man in front of him began to fall apart.
Officer Tyler Reeves hadn't meant to open the folder right away. At first, he just held it. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, but in a way that made his fingers tighten unconsciously. The green cover was worn thin at the edges, corners rounded from decades of being carried, moved, tucked away, and taken out again. This wasn't something kept for show, it was something kept because it mattered. Harold Whitman stood quietly beside his car, hands folded in front of him, eyes lowered. He didn't say a word. He didn't explain. He didn't defend himself. He simply waited. Reeves cleared his throat and flipped the folder open. The first page wasn't flashy, no medals taped to the front, no dramatic photos, just a name. Whitman, Harold James. Service number, partially faded. Date of enlistment, June 14th, 1959. Date of discharge, September 3rd, 1971. Reeves blinked. That was longer than he expected. 12 years. He scanned further down. Primary assignment, infantry. Deployments, Vietnam, 1965 to 68. Vietnam, 1969 to 1970. Reeves felt a subtle shift in his posture. The casual lean he'd carried moments earlier straightened without him realizing it. Vietnam. Not a desk job, not a short tour. 2 deployments. His eyes moved down the page. Commendations. Bronze Star. Purple Heart twice. Combat Infantryman Badge. His breath stalled. 2 Purple Hearts. Reeves swallowed hard and turned the page. Inside were old documents, typed on yellowed paper. Letters, official stamps, a black and white photograph slipped into a plastic sleeve. A much younger Harold stood in the photo, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, barely more than a kid. Mud clung to his boots. A rifle rested against his leg. His smile was small but steady. Reeves stared at the picture longer than he should have. The man in the photo looked nothing like the frail figure standing beside the sedan now. And yet, somehow he did. "You were wounded," Reeves said quietly, more statement than question. Harold nodded once. "Yes, sir." "How many times?" Harold hesitated. "Officially," he said gently, "twice." Reeves glanced up. "Unofficially." Harold gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "More than that." The street around them seemed to fade. The distant traffic noise dulled now. Even the flashing lights felt quieter now, less aggressive, almost ashamed. Reeves flipped another page. A typed report caught his eye. Engagement, Quan Tri Province, April 1968. He began to read. The words were clinical, detached, the way military documents always were, but the meaning behind them pressed hard against his chest. Subject Whitman led his unit under heavy fire after commanding officer was incapacitated, maintained position for 6 hours, provided medical aid to wounded despite sustaining injuries, refused evacuation until all men were accounted for. Reeves's jaw tightened. "You stayed," he murmured. Harold nodded. "Yes. They were kids, some of them younger than my grandson is now." Reeves looked up sharply. "You have a grandson?" "Yes, he's 11. There was pride in Harold's voice, quiet, careful pride. Reeves glanced back down at the page. Another document slipped free, a folded letter, brittle with age. At the top, in bold letters, Department of the Army. Reeves unfolded it. The handwriting was neat but firm. "Mr. Whitman, on behalf of the United States Army in a grateful nation." Reeves stopped reading. His throat felt tight. He realized with a strange jolt that he was standing in the middle of a quiet street holding the life story of a man he'd just humiliated, a man who had once bled for freedoms Reeves had never had to think about. "You keep this in your glove box," Reeves said quietly. Harold shifted his weight. "I don't like leaving it at home. Too many things can be lost. Fires, floods." He paused. "And sometimes people forget." Reeves felt that one land hard. People forget. He glanced back toward the patrol car, toward the ticket book still resting on the hood, toward the citation already written in ink. A citation for driving too slow, for hesitation, for being old. "Mr. Whitman," Reeves said, his voice noticeably different now, "I didn't know." Harold offered a small, tired smile. "That's all right, officer. I've been yelled at by worse men than you." That wasn't an insult. It was a fact. Reeves felt his ears burn. He glanced again at Harold's hands, the tremor, the stiffness, the scars faint but unmistakable. "What happened to your hands?" Reeves asked quietly. Harold looked down at them. "Shrapnel. And time." Reeves nodded. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The bystanders across the street had gone quiet. Phones lowered, curiosity shifted into something else. Confusion? Maybe even respect. Reeves handed the folder back. Harold accepted it with care, sliding it back into the glove box where it belonged. Reeves looked at the ticket still in his hand. Then, slowly, deliberately, he tore it in half. Then again. The paper fluttered to the pavement. "I'm voiding the citation. You didn't do anything that deserves punishment." Harold blinked. "You don't have to do that." "I do, because I was wrong." Harold studied him, really studied him now. Then he nodded. "Thank you." Reeves hesitated. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why didn't you say anything about your service, about who you are?" Harold smiled faintly. "Because respect given only after proof isn't really respect, and because no one owes me kindness for doing my duty." Reeves felt that settle deep in his chest. He straightened fully now, shoulders squared, stance formal. Without thinking it, without planning it, he raised his hand and saluted. Clean, precise, respectful. Harold froze. His eyes widened slightly. Then, slowly, painfully, he raised his own hand and returned the salute, the movement stiff but unmistakably practiced. Two men stood in silence on a quiet street. One who had once served, one who had nearly forgotten what that meant. And neither of them realized yet that this moment, this simple exchange, was about to ripple far beyond this road, into a department, a community, in a reckoning that no one could ignore.
The low growl of an approaching engine broke the stillness. Officer Reeves lowered his hand from the salute as a dark blue SUV rolled to a stop behind the patrol car. The vehicle bore no flashy markings, just the subtle insignia of supervision, the kind that made younger officers straighten instinctively. Reeves felt his stomach tighten. Sergeant Alan Crowley stepped out. Late 40s, broad shoulders, hair cut short enough to pass inspection at a glance. Crowley had spent 25 years on the force and carried himself like a man who believed deeply in order, sometimes more than empathy. "What's going on here?" Crowley asked, his eyes flicking between Reeves, the elderly man, and the shredded ticket on the ground. Reeves opened his mouth, but Harold spoke first. "Morning, Sergeant," Harold said politely, dipping his head. Crowley paused. Something about the man's tone, calm, respectful, unafraid, caught his attention. "Morning," he replied slowly. "Everything all right?" "Yes, sir. Officer Reeves and I were just finishing up." Crowley's gaze snapped to Reeves. "Finishing up?" he repeated. "I was told there was a disturbance, a citizen complaint." Reeves nodded. "Yes, sir. I initiated a traffic stop for obstructing traffic. I handled it poorly." Crowley raised an eyebrow. "Poorly how?" Reeves took a breath. "I spoke out of line. I made assumptions. I issued a citation I shouldn't have." Crowley looked down at the torn paper, then back up. "You voided a ticket without authorization?" "Yes, sir." There it was. The unspoken challenge. Crowley's jaw tightened. "Step aside, Reeves," he said curtly. Reeves obeyed immediately, standing a few feet back, hands clasped behind him. Crowley turned to Harold. "Sir, may I see your license and registration?" "Of course," Harold replied, moving slowly, deliberately. He retrieved the documents from the glove box, the same glove box that held the green folder. As Harold handed over the papers, Crowley noticed it. The worn folder. Its edges peeked out just enough. "What's that?" Crowley asked. Harold hesitated. "My service record," he said simply. Crowley's eyes narrowed slightly. "Service record?" "Yes, sir." Crowley glanced at Reeves, then back at Harold. "Mind if I take a look?" Harold considered the question, then nodded. "Go ahead." Crowley opened the folder. At first, his expression remained neutral, professional, detached. Then his eyes slowed, the same way Reeves had. Crowley flipped a page, then another. His lips pressed together. "Vietnam," he muttered. "Yes, sir." Crowley scanned further. "Two Purple Hearts," he said almost under his breath. "Yes." Crowley cleared his throat and turned another page. "Bronze Star," he read. The air shifted. Crowley closed the folder slowly. When he looked up, his tone had changed. "What's your name, sir?" "Harold Whitman." Crowley nodded. "Mr. Whitman, thank you for your service."
Harold inclined his head. "You're welcome." Crowley turned toward Reeves. "Is this what you saw?" "Yes, sir," Reeves said firmly. "All of it." Crowley opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. He exhaled through his nose. "Walk me through the stop." Reeves spoke carefully, owning every word. "I assumed he was obstructing traffic. I spoke harshly. I threatened a citation. I didn't ask questions. I didn't listen." Crowley watched him closely. "And then?" "I opened the folder." Crowley nodded once. Silence stretched. A few bystanders edged closer now, drawn by the tension. Someone across the street held up a phone, not filming loudly, just quietly recording. Crowley noticed. He always noticed. "Mr. Whitman," said Crowley, turning back to Harold, "did Officer Reeves use profanity or physical force?" "No, sir." "Did he threaten you?" Harold paused. "He spoke sharply," he said carefully, "but no more than life has." Crowley studied him. "You could file a complaint." "I won't," Harold replied. Reeves stiffened. "Why not?" Crowley asked. Harold shrugged gently. "Because he learned something today, and because I don't want to be the reason a good man loses his job." Reeves's eyes burned. Crowley looked between them. Then he nodded slowly. "There's body cam footage," Crowley said. "Yes, sir," Reeves replied. Crowley tapped the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, mark this incident for review." Reeves's heart sank, but Crowley raised a hand. "Not disciplinary, educational." Reeves blinked. Crowley turned to Harold again. "Mr. Whitman, I want you to know something. This department does not condone disrespect toward our elders or our veterans." Harold smiled faintly. "Good to hear." Crowley hesitated, then did something unexpected. He stepped forward and extended his hand. Harold was surprised, then took it. The handshake was firm, respectful. Crowley leaned in slightly. "My father served Korea," he said. Harold's eyes softened. "He must have been a strong man." "He was. Still is, when he remembers." Something unspoken passed between them. Crowley stepped back. "You're free to go, Mr. Whitman." "Thank you, Sergeant." As Harold returned to his car, Crowley turned to Reeves. "Walk with me," he said. They moved a few steps away. "You got lucky today," Crowley said quietly. "Yes, sir. But luck isn't what saved you. Humility did." Reeves nodded. "I know." Crowley studied him. "Ever seen combat?" "No, sir." "Then don't pretend you know what strength looks like. Sometimes it looks like shaking hands and quiet dignity." "Yes, sir." Crowley's gaze hardened slightly. "This footage may circulate." Reeves's heart skipped. "People don't like seeing authority corrected, especially by age or service." "I understand." "Are you willing to stand by your actions?" Reeves didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." Crowley nodded. "Good. Because when this hits, you'll be judged by the public, by the department, by yourself." He paused. "And you'll also be remembered for how you handled the moment you realized you were wrong." Reeves swallowed. Across the street, Harold's car pulled away slowly, signal blinking patiently. Crowley watched it disappear. "Men like that built the road you're standing on," he said quietly. "Don't forget it." Reeves stared at the empty space where the car had been. "I won't." Crowley clapped him once on the shoulder. "Let's get back to work." Neither of them knew yet that the quiet recording across the street, the salute, the handshake, the torn ticket, had already been uploaded, and that by nightfall, millions of people would be watching, arguing, remembering, and asking themselves a hard question. When was the last time you looked twice before judging someone who'd already given everything? By the time Harold Whitman reached the end of Maple Street, he already felt the weight lifting from his chest. The encounter was over. No ticket, no argument, no bitterness. Just a strange, quiet exhaustion, the kind that followed moments you didn't expect to revisit at your age. He drove slowly, careful not to rush the engine of his old sedan. The radio played softly, some country song he barely noticed. His hands, speckled with age spots and veins like thin blue lines, rested steady on the wheel. He didn't know that less than 2 miles behind him, the world was beginning to talk. Across the street from where the stop had taken place, a woman named Linda Harper sat in her parked car, phone still warm in her hand. She hadn't meant to record at first. It started as curiosity, an elderly man being scolded by a young officer. Something about the tone, the posture, the imbalance of power made her uneasy, so she lifted her phone, just in case. What she captured instead was something else entirely. The raised voice, the folder, the sudden change, the salute, the handshake. By the time Harold drove away, Linda's hands were shaking. She watched the clip again and again. Then she uploaded it. She titled it simply, "Cop Stops Elderly Man, Then Reads His Service Record." She didn't add commentary. She didn't add hashtags. She didn't need to. Within an hour, the video had been shared thousands of times. By noon, it was everywhere. Officer Reeves didn't find out from his supervisors. He found out from his phone. The first notification came while he was back in his patrol car, finishing paperwork. A text from his younger brother. "Is this you?" Attached was a link. Reeves clicked it. He watched himself on screen, stern, rigid, confident in the worst way. Then he watched the shift, the pause, the folder, the crumble, the salute. His throat tightened. He scrolled down. Comments flooded the screen. Some angry, some forgiving, some painfully honest. "That old man looks like my dad. Respect your elders." At least the officer owned it. "This shouldn't have happened, but I'm glad it ended right." Reeves shut the phone off. He leaned back in his seat and stared at the ceiling of the car. He'd known this was coming. He just hadn't known how fast. At police headquarters, the mood shifted by mid-afternoon. Screens glowed in offices, phones rang non-stop. The chief's assistant stopped smiling. Captain Elaine Morris stood in the conference room with her arms crossed, watching the video play on the wall-mounted monitor. She didn't blink. She watched every second. When it ended, she turned slowly. "Bring Officer Reeves in," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. That was worse. Reeves sat alone in the small interview room, uniform still crisp, badge catching the fluorescent light. Across from him sat Captain Morris and Sergeant Crawley. A tablet lay on the table between them. Morris folded her hands. "You want to walk me through what happened?" she asked. Reeves nodded. He didn't rush. He didn't defend. He told the truth. Every assumption, every misstep, every moment he realized he was wrong. When he finished, the room stayed silent. Morris tapped the tablet once. "You understand this is already national news?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "You understand people are angry?" "Yes." "And you understand some people are proud of you?" Reeves looked up, surprised. "Yes, ma'am." Morris leaned back. "You didn't look good in the first half of that video," she said plainly. "But the second half, that's what people aren't used to seeing." She glanced at Crawley. "Accountability." Crawley nodded. Morris continued. "You will undergo additional training. You will be reassigned temporarily, and you will issue a formal apology." Reeves swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "But," Morris added, holding up a finger, "you will not be suspended." Reeves blinked. "Why?" "Because you corrected yourself, because you learned, and because the man you wronged chose grace over revenge." She slid the tablet toward him. A still image froze on the screen. Harold's face. Calm, dignified, unbroken. "Don't waste that gift," Morris said. Reeves nodded, eyes burning. "I won't." Harold found out later that evening. His phone rang as he sat at his small kitchen table, eating soup from a chipped bowl. "Hello?" "Mr. Whitman?" a woman said gently. "This is Captain Elaine Morris with the City Police Department." Harold straightened slightly. "Yes, ma'am." "I wanted to personally apologize for what occurred today." Harold sighed softly. "It's already behind me."
I know, but it shouldn't be. She paused. May I ask you something? Go ahead. Why didn't you file a complaint? Harold looked down at his hands. Because I've lived long enough to know the difference between a bad man and a good man having a bad moment. There was silence on the other end. Then Morris said quietly, Thank you. When the call ended, Harold sat for a long time in the quiet. Outside, the evening news played through a neighbor's open window. He heard his own story being told by strangers. He turned the volume down. He'd never wanted attention. He just wanted respect. Across the country, people watched. Veterans nodded. Parents wiped eyes. Grandchildren asked questions. And in living rooms filled with decades of memory, one truth echoed louder than any headline. Authority isn't proven by power. It's proven by humility. And tomorrow, whether Officer Reeves was ready or not, that truth would demand a public reckoning.
The apology didn't happen in a quiet office or behind a press release written by lawyers. It happened in the open. On a gray Thursday morning, the city set up a simple podium on the steps of the municipal building. No banners, no slogans, just the seal of the department and a single microphone that squeaked faintly when the wind shifted. By 8 a.m., people had already gathered. Some came out of curiosity, some out of anger, some because they recognized the look in Harold Whitman's eyes from the video, the look of a man who had carried weight for a lifetime without asking to be thanked. Harold himself hadn't planned to attend. He was sitting at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone lukewarm, when his neighbor, Mrs. Klein, knocked on the door. "You should go," she said gently, as if suggesting church. "I don't need an apology," Harold replied. "I know," she said, "but some people need to give one." So Harold put on his old jacket, the brown one with the frayed cuffs, and let her drive him downtown. He didn't wear his medals. He didn't wear his old cap. Just a man among people. When Officer Daniel Reeves stepped up to the podium, the murmur quieted. He looked younger than he had in the video. Smaller, somehow. His uniform was pressed, but his shoulders were tight. His hands rested on either side of the podium, fingers gripping the edges like an anchor. He didn't start with protocol. He started with a breath. "My name is Officer Daniel Reeves," he said, voice steady but unguarded. "And earlier this week, I failed to live up to the oath I took." A camera shutter clicked. Reeves continued. "I stopped an elderly man for a minor traffic violation. I spoke to him in a way that was dismissive, impatient, and wrong. There was no spin, no, if anyone was offended, no excuses. I judged him before I knew him," Reeves said, "and that judgment says more about me than it ever did about him." He paused. Then he turned slightly, scanning the crowd until his eyes found Harold. "For the record," Reeves said, voice softening, "that man is Harold Whitman, a Korean War veteran, a former firefighter, and someone who deserved respect long before I ever showed it." All eyes turned. Harold felt heat rise to his cheeks. He shifted uncomfortably. Reeves straightened. "Mr. Whitman," he said, speaking directly now, "I am sorry. Not just for what I said, but for what it represented, for forgetting that service doesn't expire with age." He stepped back from the podium. Then, without prompting, he removed his cap and saluted. The crowd didn't cheer. They stood. Some slowly, some stiffly, some with hands over hearts. A few older men lifted trembling hands to return the gesture. Harold didn't move at first. Then he rose, joints protesting, spine straightening the way it hadn't in years. He didn't salute. He nodded. Once. It was enough. By noon, the apology had traveled further than the video ever had. Veteran organizations shared it,
Firefighter unions reposted it. Even critics who had condemned Reeves earlier acknowledged the moment. But the story didn't end there. That afternoon, Harold's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Old friends, former coworkers, men he hadn't spoken to since retirement dinners and funerals. "You see that kid? He did right," said another. Harold listened more than he spoke. In the evening, a knock came at his door. Officer Reeves stood there alone. No cameras, no supervisors, just him. "I didn't want to show up uninvited," he said carefully, "but I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to talk." Harold studied him for a long moment. Then he opened the door wider. They sat at the same kitchen table. Reeves noticed the small things, the photographs on the wall, the folded flag in its case, the faint smell of soup still lingering. "I didn't grow up with grandparents," Reeves said quietly. "I didn't learn how to slow down." Harold nodded. "Speed feels like control when you're young. Takes time to learn it's not." They talked for an hour, about the job, about mistakes, about the way anger can feel like authority until it burns out. When Reeves stood to leave, he hesitated. "I won't remember this," he said. "Good," Harold replied. "Neither will I." The department followed through on its word. Reeves was reassigned temporarily to community outreach, senior centers, veterans halls, neighborhood meetings. At first, some people crossed their arms. Then they listened. Reeves listened harder. He learned names. He learned stories. He learned that the people he once rushed past carried histories longer than his career. One afternoon, he found himself at a local VFW hall folding chairs beside Harold. Neither spoke for a while. Then Harold said, "You know what most of us want?" Reeves shook his head. "To be seen before we're gone." Reeves swallowed. Weeks passed. The story faded from the headlines, replaced by the next outrage, the next clip. But something else remained. At traffic stops, officers spoke slower. At community meetings, elders spoke louder. And somewhere between authority and humility, a line shifted. Harold noticed it first at the grocery store. A young clerk helped him load his bags without being asked. At the pharmacy, a teenager offered a chair while he waited. Small things, but at his age, small things were everything. One evening, Harold sat alone on his porch watching the sun sink low. His phone buzzed. A message from Reeves. "Thank you again. I'm trying to do better." Harold typed back slowly. "That's all of us ever can." He set the phone down. The street grew quiet. And for the first time since that flashing blue light had filled his rearview mirror, Harold felt something settle into place. Not justice, not victory, but something steadier. Respect returned. And though the world would move on, those who watched closely understood. It wasn't about a ticket avoided. It was about a moment when power paused, listened, and chose humility. And that choice, rare, fragile, human, is what people would remember.
The backlash didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, through comment sections, late-night opinion shows, and whispered conversations that carried more edge than curiosity. Not everyone saw redemption. Some saw weakness. On a popular radio segment the following week, a host scoffed. "So now cops have to apologize every time they do their job?" Another caller chimed in, voice sharp. "What if that old man was dangerous? Are we supposed to cry before enforcing the law now?" The clip replayed again. Not the whole thing, just the first 30 seconds. The raised voice, the stern posture, the imbalance. Context was trimmed away like excess fat. Online, the narrative split. One side called Officer Reeves a model for accountability. The other called him a symbol of soft policing. And caught between it all was Harold Whitman, a man who never wanted to be a symbol of anything. He noticed it when he went to the hardware store. 2 men behind him in line watched him closely. One leaned in and whispered, not quietly enough, "That's the guy. The cop apologized to him." Harold paid for his nails and said nothing. At the diner later that week, a woman stopped him near the counter. "You ruined that officer's career," she said flatly. Harold met her eyes. "I didn't ask him to raise his voice, and I didn't ask him to lower it either." She didn't respond, just walked away. Officer Reeves felt the backlash more sharply. His inbox filled with messages, some supportive, others venomous. One read, "Grow a spine." Another, "My father served too, you didn't need to bow." He read every one. At night, he replayed the stop in his head. Not the worst parts, but the pause, the moment he'd chosen to look again. He didn't regret it, but regret didn't stop consequences. At roll call one morning, a senior officer pulled him aside. "You made waves," the man said quietly. "Some folks don't like waves." Reeves nodded. "I understand." "You sure?" he asked. Reeves looked past him, toward the open garage doors where daylight spilled in. "Yes." Harold's mailbox began filling with letters, handwritten ones. Veterans from other states, widows of men long gone, even a retired state trooper who wrote, "I wish someone had stopped me when I was younger." Harold read them slowly, carefully. Some nights he cried. Other nights he laughed softly at the familiar language, the gallows humor, the stoicism, the shared understanding of time running short. But among the letters was one envelope that unsettled him. No return address. Inside, a single sentence. "Next time, don't expect mercy." Harold folded the paper, placed it back in the envelope, and set it beside his bed. He slept anyway. The department felt the pressure too. City council members asked for meetings, union reps raised concerns, policy analysts debated whether respect could be measured. Captain Morris stood her ground. "This isn't about feelings," she said during one closed-door meeting. "It's about judgment." Outside the building, a small protest formed one afternoon. Signs varied. "Respect goes both ways. Don't handcuff authority. Honor our elders." 2 groups facing each other across a narrow strip of concrete. Voices rose, then steadied. A veteran stepped forward, cane in one hand, cap in the other. He didn't shout. He spoke. "We didn't serve so we could be feared. We served so we wouldn't be forgotten." Silence followed. Harold avoided the noise. He kept his routines. Morning walks, coffee at the same cafe, sitting on the same bench at the park. One afternoon, a young mother sat beside him while her child played nearby. "My dad passed last year," she said suddenly. "He would have liked you." Harold smiled gently. "Then I'm glad you're sitting here." Reeves's reassignment ended after 3 months. When he returned to patrol, something had changed. Not his authority, his awareness. He spoke slower, listened longer, asked questions he never had before. Some colleagues noticed, some mocked, but others followed. One evening, Reeves spotted a familiar car pulled over on the side of the road, hazard lights blinking. He slowed. It was Harold. Reeves parked behind him, stepped out carefully. "Car trouble?" Reeves asked. Harold nodded. "Battery's older than you." They shared a small smile. Reeves called for assistance. They waited. Neither spoke much. They didn't need to. As the tow truck arrived, Harold extended his hand. Reeves shook it firmly. No cameras, no crowd. Just 2 men standing where power had once stood between them, now replaced by something steadier. Mutual respect. The backlash faded, as backlashes do.
What remained was quieter, deeper. A lesson passed hand to hand instead of headline to headline. That authority without humility fractures, and humility without authority still holds weight. And for those who lived long enough to see both sides, that balance mattered more than any ticket ever could.
Time has a way of sorting truth from noise. By early autumn, the headlines had moved on. The protests dissolved. The radio hosts found new villains. And the internet, restless as ever, chose a different story to argue over. But for the people actually touched by that roadside stop, life did not reset so easily. For Harold Whitman, Section 7 of his life arrived quietly, not with confrontation, but with consequence. The town library called him first. "Mr. Whitman," the woman on the phone said gently, "we're starting a local history project. Oral stories from residents who lived through, well, everything. Someone suggested your name." Harold almost declined. He had spent a lifetime being useful, not visible. Speaking up had never been his goal. But then he thought of the letters, the veterans, the widows, the note in the drawer. "All right," he said finally, "I'll come by." The library basement smelled like dust and paper. A young man with a recorder greeted him, nervous but respectful. "Just talk, however you want." Harold sat, folded his hands, and stared at the wall for a long moment. "I was 19 when I first put on a uniform. Didn't know what fear was yet." The words came slowly at first, then steadier. He talked about Korea, about cold mornings that cracked your skin, about orders that didn't always make sense but had to be followed anyway. He spoke of friends who didn't come back, of coming home to a country that didn't know what to do with men like him. And finally, he talked about the traffic stop. Not the anger, not the yelling, but the pause. "The moment someone chooses to look again," Harold said softly, "that's where change lives." The young man stopped recording when Harold's voice broke. They sat in silence for a minute. "Thank you," the man said. Harold nodded. Across town, Officer Daniel Reeves faced a different kind of reckoning. The department announced a new mentorship initiative, pairing younger officers with senior citizens and veterans in the community. It was voluntary. Reeves signed up immediately. His first pairing, a retired firefighter named Leo Martinez, 72, sharp tongue, worse knees. They met weekly at a diner. Leo didn't hold back. "You cops forget, a badge don't make you right, just responsible." Reeves listened. He didn't interrupt. He learned. Word spread. Not online, in living rooms, church basements, VFW halls. Harold Whitman became something unexpected, a listener. People approached him not because he'd been wronged, but because he'd been seen. A middle-aged man stopped him outside the post office one day. "My dad died last year. He was pulled over a lot. Never went like yours did." Harold placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "Maybe it can now," he said. One evening, Harold received an envelope with an official seal. Inside was an invitation. City Hall, Community Advisory Panel. He laughed out loud. "Me?" he thought. But then he remembered something his wife used to say. "If you don't speak while you still can, someone else will speak for you." He attended, sat quietly, listened, and when it was his turn, he spoke plainly. "Respect isn't a favor, it's maintenance. You don't notice it until it's gone." No applause, just nods. Reeves attended the same meeting, seated across the room. Their eyes met briefly. A mutual understanding passed between them. Not friendship, not forgiveness, something sturdier, recognition. The following month, the department released updated training guidelines. Nothing flashy, no slogans, just one added line under conduct. Pause before assumption. Some scoffed, Others adopted it quietly. On a cool November morning, Harold visited the cemetery. He stood before his wife's grave, brushed leaves away. "Well," he said softly, "I made a mess without meaning to." He imagined her smile, the knowing one. "I think it mattered," he added. The wind answered. Later that week, Reeves received an envelope in his locker. No signature, just a folded piece of paper. "You didn't ruin anything. You repaired something." Reeves sat down on the bench and read it twice. Harold's health began to slow him. Nothing dramatic, just the steady reminders of age. He walked less, rested more, but his phone rang often. Students, journalists, community organizers. He declined most, accepted a few. "Don't make me a hero," he told them. "Make me a warning or a lesson." One afternoon, Reeves responded to a call near the same stretch of road where it had all begun. Different car, different driver, same sun dipping low. As he approached, he felt the old tension rise, then settle. He breathed, spoke calmly. The stop ended without incident. As he returned to his cruiser, he caught his reflection in the window, and for the first time in a long while, he recognized the man looking back. Some stories fade because they were never meant to last. Others linger because they change the way people behave when no one is watching. Harold Whitman's story did the latter, not loudly, not perfectly, but enough. And sometimes, enough is the most powerful thing of all.
Winter arrived early that year. Not with drama, but with the kind of cold that settles into bones and refuses to leave. The streets blazed over with thin ice, the sky stayed gray for weeks at a time, and the town seemed to move more slowly, as if everyone had collectively decided to tread with more care. For Harold Whitman, the cold brought memories. Cold mornings overseas, cold letters delivered to warm kitchens, cold silence when men came home changed. But this winter carried something else, too. Closure. Harold's doctor was the one who said it plainly. "You've been running on grit for a long time," she told him, folding her hands. "But grit isn't infinite." Harold nodded. He wasn't afraid. He had outlived many of the men he'd once marched beside. He had buried his wife with dignity. He had seen his name spoken with respect again, not because of a uniform, but because of restraint. That felt like enough. Still, the doctor insisted on cutting back. No long walks, no late nights, no unnecessary stress. Harold smiled faintly. "Life's always been unnecessary stress," he said. The town held a small ceremony in December, not announced loudly, no banners, no politicians fighting for the microphone, just a community gathering at the old Civic Hall. Veterans, officers, teachers, families. Harold hadn't planned to attend, but his mailbox that morning held dozens of handwritten notes. One stood out. "You don't know me, but because of you, my grandson isn't afraid of police anymore." Harold folded the letter carefully, placed it in his coat pocket, and decided to go. Officer Daniel Reeves arrived early. He stood near the back at first, hands clasped behind him, watching people file in. He saw Harold enter slowly, leaning slightly on his cane. Reeves felt something tighten in his chest, not guilt, responsibility. When Harold spotted him, they exchanged a nod, nothing more. They had said everything that mattered already. The mayor spoke briefly, too briefly perhaps, but with sincerity. "This town has learned something this year, not about blame, about humility." Then she stepped aside. A local high school student approached the podium next. Nervous, thin voice, trembling hands. "My history teacher asked us to write about courage, not the loud kind, the quiet kind." She swallowed. "I wrote about a man who stayed calm when someone younger and stronger treated him unfairly.
I wrote about how dignity doesn't shout." The room was silent. Harold felt his eyes burn. After the ceremony, people approached him slowly, not to shake hands, to listen. A young officer spoke first. "My dad served," he said. "I forget that sometimes." Harold nodded. "You'll remember. Just don't wait for a mistake to remind you." Reeves waited until the crowd thinned. Then he approached. "Mr. Whitman," he said quietly. Harold looked up. "Yes, son?" Reeves hesitated, something rare for him now. "I wanted you to know," he said quietly. "I've started teaching the academy classes, the new ones." Harold raised an eyebrow. "What do you teach?" Reeves exhaled. "How to pause." Harold smiled. "Good, that's the hardest lesson." They stood together for a moment, two men from two ends of the same mistake. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. The department still had bad days, the town still argued, the world kept spinning in its uneven way. But something had shifted, subtly, deeply. Traffic stops became calmer, officers spoke more, listened longer. And sometimes, when tempers flared, someone would say quietly, "Take a breath." Harold spent more time at home. He organized old photos, wrote letters he never sent, left notes tucked into books. One afternoon, he opened the glove box of his car, the same one that had started it all. Inside, beneath the service record, lay a folded piece of paper, his wife's handwriting. "You don't have to fight to be strong." He closed the glove box gently. His health declined in the spring, peacefully, no sirens, no rush, just a slow slipping away surrounded by familiarity. When he passed, the obituary was simple. No mention of controversy, no headlines, just a line near the end. He believed respect was owed before it was demanded. Officer Reeves attended the funeral in uniform, not for optics, for honor. He stood in the back again, listened, learned. When the service ended, he placed something quietly on the casket, a folded citation card, blank, unused. Months later, a new recruit asked Reeves about it. "Why'd you keep that?" the recruit asked. Reeves thought for a moment. "Because power is easy, restraint is earned." Years passed. The video faded into obscurity, but the policy change remained. The training stayed. And somewhere, every now and then, a cop paused before raising his voice. Somewhere, an elderly driver exhaled instead of trembling. And somewhere, a glove box held proof that a life had meant something, not because of authority, but because of humanity. So let me ask you, if you were the officer that day, would you have looked again? And if you were the man in the car, would you have stayed calm long enough to be heard? Tell us in the comments, because sometimes the smallest pause can change everything.